After playing Humankind for about an hour, my first impressions were not very good. I just thought it was a poor copy of Civilization 6. But here's the thing, I just didn't understand how the game worked. There's a good reason I don't review games until I've fully finished them. You can't give a fair opinion on something if you don't understand it. And guess what? By the time I'd got my head around Humankind and finished the game, I really enjoyed it, and I do actually think that it's a better game than Civilization 6. If you'd like to check out the first hour of gameplay to see how it was different, or even view my entire playthrough, you can find the link down below. And if you like this style of no-nonsense brief review, then don't forget to subscribe. Humankind is a turn-based empire-building strategy game, single or multiplayer. And like many others, you start off with a tribe in prehistory and have to develop those people all the way through time into a modern, futuristic nation and empire. You win the game by having the highest fame score at the end, and you do this by traditional military conquest and taking over the world, maybe making great advances in science, or building loads of wonders and just being a really cool nation. This is probably sounding very familiar to fans of the genre, right? But this game has three major differences. The first one being cultures. Unlike other games of this type where you pick a nation and play as that race all the way throughout history, in Humankind you don't. You start off with a tribe of Neolithic human hunter-gatherers, which, as the name says on the tin, are all about hunting and gathering. But when you've developed them enough, you'll progress into a new era, the ancient era. You'll pick a culture for the first time. Might be the Assyrians or the Egyptians, there's loads to choose from, and each culture has its own unique trait, which sticks with you throughout time, some unique units and unique buildings. Now the cool thing here is when you progress into a new era, the classical and the medieval and the early modern, etc., you get to pick a new culture. You don't stay with the same tribe or race all the way throughout history. You can, and you get a bonus to your fame score if you do, but you miss out on the new unique benefits, the traits that stack from culture to culture, and the new unique buildings, and just the opportunity to take your race or nation or empire in a different direction. This is a mechanic that sounds very confusing at first, but actually works very well, and sometimes a little bit too well. You see, each culture has its own unique abilities, and these do stack with other cultures. So if you want to go for like a scientific victory in the game, you pick cultures that have bonuses to their science and build scientific buildings. Likewise, if you want to go military, picking loads of cultures with militaristic traits are going to give you a really strong, powerful military by the time you get to the end game. Now, some of these bonuses do seem a bit too good for some of the cultures, and they might be toned down in patches, but it's possible to stack things which make your empire seemingly overpowered. This is a bit of a problem in multiplayer games, but of course not so much against the AI, where you can just ruffle stomp them and have some fun. I've got to say, it seemed a little bit funny at first, starting off playing as the Assyrians and then becoming the Romans, who turned into the Vikings, who turned into the English. It does work well, and it's a curious concept and quite a nice one to see that the devs have gone with something a bit different. The second major difference is city building. You don't just plonk loads of cities down all over the map. It works differently. There's a limit to how many cities that you can actually build, and there's various traits and abilities and things which will actually increase this. But you don't necessarily need to. You see, you can found outposts in adjacent territories to your main cities and attach them to that city. Then all the population and resource and production from the outpost goes to the city. So you can really centralize production and research if you want. Again, this is one of the things that I really didn't get my head around at the start of the game, and I was trying to build cities everywhere and going over my city cap, which incurs penalties, and I thought, this doesn't work, or I'm doing something wrong. But luckily I persevered with it, and when I got my head around this concept and learnt how to use it to my advantage, the whole thing worked really well. And the third major difference that I can see between this and something like Civilization 6 is that in here you can stack military units on a single hex and move them around like a combined army. And when you get into a battle with them, the game generates a battlefield based on the area of the map that you and your opponents are on, and you get a little fight breakout, which is, again, turn-based, has some issues, but it's generally different. One of the big complaints I had about Civilization 6 was that your armies and units tended to really get in the way of each other when you're trying to move across a map with choke points and mountains and stuff. But that isn't the issue here. And again, you can develop your armies with techs and cultural traits and things to be able to include more units in. And if you include more units than your opponent, well, then maybe you've got a big advantage. So those are the three main differences. The rest of the game is your typical 4X stuff of exploration, expanding, exterminating, and whatever the other X is, because I can never remember. You've got diplomacy, and there's also a feature where you can actually upload your AI profile of your own character in the game up to a platform where other people can download it and play against it with the traits that you've assigned. Now that's kind of cool because you can then download other players' profiles and avatars, and some famous streamers do this as well, and you can include them in your game as an AI character, which is a little bit novel, and I quite like the idea of that. Okay, on to graphics, sound and performance. Now visually, this game isn't anything too special, but then the nature of these games are that they don't have the most amazing fancy graphics with the greatest effects. However, I will say that I enjoyed them. The world map looks pretty nice, and the units, and in particular the unit animations, looked really good. I loved seeing the riflemen kneel to shoot and the musketeers open fire and unleash a volley on an enemy. I also quite liked the cutscene art style. That was pretty good. But overall with the visuals, there's nothing too much to get too excited about. It's just functional and pleasant. The audio is a different matter though. There are two things that really stood out here. One is the narrator.
So now we advance as the warlike Assyrians. You're not going to be a very nice neighbour, are you?
It is top-notch voice acting and delivery. I really like this and could listen to this narrator's voice all day long. And also the soundtrack is really good. The music that plays. They've got different music for each era of the game, and it all just flows really nicely. And you can just listen and chill out with some of the tunes. There's a big problem with some of the sound effects though. They've got the wrong sound files attributed to some of the units. Hopefully this is going to get patched quickly and might even be fixed by this time. But because you've got ranged units in olden times using bows, modern ranged units using muskets and rifles, they sometimes use the wrong sound effects. So you'll have your riflemen or your musketeers line up, and when they give them a volley, the commander of the unit will say, "Bows!" or "Loose!" And it's just, it's a simple thing. It does detract a little bit from using those units, and it is stupid, but I'm sure it'll get fixed. But that's really the only issue I could find with the sound. Performance was overall fine, but the game did crash on me quite a few times in random places. We'll discuss more about this later on because I do think the game was maybe released a little bit too soon. Hopefully these things are all going to get patched and fixed pretty quickly though. Okay then, on to the likes and dislikes, and as always, starting with the good stuff, the things I enjoyed about Humankind. This offers something new. I've played turn-based strategy games all the way back to the original Civilization back in the 90s. And I feel like I've pretty much seen everything there is to offer in this genre, but Humankind brought something new that I had to actually invest some time into learning how to use to really appreciate. I like the way the culture systems work. Alright, it feels a bit weird not using the same culture or same nation all the way throughout the game, but then you realise that you can put together these amazing packages of different cultures as you develop from one time to the next. For example, here in the UK, we were maybe once upon a time thought of as ancient Britons, and at various times from then thought as Celts or Picts or Romans, Romano-British, and then Saxon, Anglo-Saxon, etc., and to modern-day English and British, and then whatever we're supposed to be now. So you can see that real nations and countries have gone through these culture changes, and I feel like it's quite well represented here. It also has the bonus that if you pick a culture that maybe only has a naval benefit, and suddenly you get a map where you can't make use of that benefit, well, you're lumbered with that throughout the game, but not in Humankind, because you can change the culture to meet the different needs of your empires at any one time. It's not without its downsides. As I mentioned, you can put together very powerful combinations of these traits that do stick from one culture to the next. They have a unique trait which is cumulative. So there's definitely balance issues, and some cultures have more powerful features than others. But overall, it's pretty good. You've also got the fame score system and objectives in there as well. And depending on the type of culture you've picked, it will have different objectives. If you pick a scientific culture for one particular era, you will get more fame score for completing scientific objectives rather than just going out militarily. Likewise, if you picked a militaristic nation, you get more fame score for doing those particular objectives. It ties in with the way you want to play and the type of victory you are aiming for at the end of the game, and therefore you can get a very different feeling playthrough with different objectives and things to aim for in every game that you want to play. which is quite nice. You don't just have to go for the barbaric military conquest of the world like I tend to do. And speaking of which, I do find the combat in this game more engaging than in the last couple of Civilization games. I like the way that you can stack units so that armies don't get in the way of each other, moving through choke points on maps, for example. Although there are choke points in here, and you can defend them and use them to your advantage. High ground is the key thing in this game as well. But in other games that I've played like this, well, you've got loads of units and they can't move through the mountains because there's only one pass and they get in the way. Here you stack them and you get a nice little battlefield breakout on that part of the map when two enemy armies meet. It does need a lot of work. There are some issues, and whoever tends to go first has the huge advantage as they all pile on to the enemy's strongest unit and destroy that. And it can be a little bit imbalanced, but overall, I enjoyed the combat in this. I also like the way science works in the game. You have to develop scientific buildings and areas as you expand your cities to actually get enough science points in, assign scientists to actually do the work. But you don't have to research every single tech in the tech tree. There's some that you can skip out altogether, and you'll probably have to if you want to get to the end of your scientific era at the same time as you get to the end of your particular cultural era. You don't need everything, and you can focus down particular lines if you want. Gives you lots of options of what you'd like to do there. And other than that, as I've already mentioned, I liked the visuals and the soundtrack and the narrator in particular. All that I think was done pretty well. And unfortunately, there are a few things that I don't like so much about Humankind, so let's get into those. And the biggest issue, and this probably covers a multitude of things, is that I feel like the game was just released a little bit too soon. It doesn't feel quite finished, or at least it didn't when I played it. For example, the stability. There are some crashes. They can crash on loading the game, loading a save game. They can just randomly crash as you're playing, so make sure your autosave is on, and make sure that it is auto-saving to you where you want it to go, either locally or into the cloud, because it's possible to turn off local autosaves and only go into the cloud. Issues there that nearly caught me out once, so be aware of things like that. There were a lot of multiplayer crashes. People couldn't stay connected to each other when they were trying to play multiplayer when this first came out. I don't know if that's still a problem. There was wrong notifications coming up about your empire's achievements at any one time. For example, I got a notification pop up saying, "Congratulations, you've discovered the new world," talking about a third unexplored continent in the game. And this happened years and years and years after I'd explored, conquered and settled this new continent. Again, it's all stuff that can be patched. I hope they're going to get on with this. There are other issues as well, like the fog of war versus the AI. I think this is still present in the game, but if you put a unit onto auto explore at the start of the game, it can see through the fog of war and know exactly where the things are you need to go and collect. And I'm assuming that the AI can just see through the fog of war all the time if that's how that works. So again, that needs fixing. There was wrong voiceovers for units, which I've already mentioned, and little effects that were in the wrong place. It didn't detract hugely from the fun of playing the game, I will say, but it's just a shame that it feels like it was just pushed out the door with the attitude of, yeah, it's close enough, we'll fix it as we go. I never like to see that in game developments. You always expect bugs and things to get through, but this really does feel like it was just pushed out the door a bit early. Another thing that needs work is the balance of some of the cultures and some of the wonders. When you get to pick a world wonder to build, and you can only choose one at a time, you claim it for your civilization. No one else can build it, but you can't build any other wonder until you've completed it. It's a nice system, by the way, because all your cities can contribute their production to this one wonder and where you're placing it in the empire. But anyway, aside from that, they're not very balanced, and there are some wonders which are clearly better than the others that you can pick. And you look at the options and you think, why the hell would I pick that? I guess the only way I can try and explain that this might have been an intentional decision is that there's some benefit to getting to the requirements for picking a wonder before the other nations, perhaps? I don't know. So you get to pick the better ones and they're left with the dregs. But maybe that could be rethought, and it probably will be rebalanced. But other than that, some of the cultures themselves are just not very well balanced. You're looking through the specific bonuses that the cultures get, and some you think, whoa, that sounds good. Okay, I'm going to go with that. And then you look at another one and think, why the hell would I pick that? That sounds rubbish. There's maybe something I'm missing about some of these, but do expect that the cultures and the bonuses and the benefits might be tweaked a bit in patches by the time you get and play the game. Another thing that was really annoying was the AI diplomacy. There's some nice ideas in there about trading and some of the packs that you can create, but I find that it just didn't seem to work right for me. On the easier difficulty levels, the AI would agree to pretty much anything I offered, but anything higher than the easier difficulty levels, and whatever I asked for, they're just like, nope, nope, and we hate you for asking. And that was it. And throughout my entire playthrough, which you can see on my second channel if you want, not a single offer was ever accepted. Not a single counter offer was ever paid for. Drop the difficulty down, every single one accepted. So it feels like you're just banging your head against a wall trying to use the diplomacy feature at all. And I've got to say, I didn't really like it, but again, it's something that can be fixed. And in multiplayer games, well, I suppose that's not going to bother you anyway, if you can get connected. And not only is the AI diplomacy a bit out of whack, some of the AI combat decisions are very much so. If you meet an enemy army in the open field, they can be pretty good, but they are especially bad at defending in sieges. See, the siege modes are a nice idea. In theory, you go and attack an enemy city. It's got a few walls around it. If they've got some defences built, it actually represents the area that you've developed the city on the map. And there's the option to then start building siege engines if you've developed technology for that, so you can batter the walls down. However, I never needed to develop siege engines. I never built a single one, because when you go to attack a city, you just sit on the high ground outside the city walls, and the AI with all its defenders will just come zerging over the city walls. They won't sit and defend. They won't shoot from behind the protection of the walls. They'll just come charging out and wreck themselves and your defensively located armies every single time. The sieges in the game are kind of the thing that really lets it down for me in the combat side. Very disappointing, and I got sick of conducting sieges by the end of the game because I knew exactly how they were going to work. And the walls don't really do anything. If there's no enemy unit on the other side of the wall, you can just walk over. You don't need to batter them down. You don't need to develop any technology. The walls are there just as a inconvenience, and if you do attack over a wall, you go over at a penalty. But at the same time, you don't need to, because you just let the enemy come zerging out from their side of the walls, and you're fine. If you're defending a siege, by the way, you sit behind the walls and do nothing, and the enemy will destroy themselves charging into you. It's messy, it's scrappy, it's just not finished, like I said about some of the earlier aspects of the game. Now, because of some of the issues mentioned here, then I would recommend you go and check the game out on Game Pass if you've got it for PC. That's where I played it, and it's a good way of just giving it a try to make sure it's your sort of thing before you delve in and spend the money on it, because just playing it for an hour on Steam and then thinking you might refund it, I don't think you'll really get to understand how the game works. I didn't, so I'm just giving you a heads up about that. But overall, I did enjoy Humankind. I enjoyed my time with it. I think it's better than Civ 6, but I want to qualify that by saying I didn't really like Civ 6 or 5. I was more a 4-3-2-1 kind of guy. I enjoyed all of those. But I seriously hope the developers do fix some of the issues that I've outlined in this video, because this has a potential to be a really great game. So overall from me, at the moment, a 7 out of 10. Go and give it a try on Game Pass, and don't forget you can watch my full playthrough, links down below, or come and catch me on Twitch, where I stream a huge variety of games 3 times a week. See you then, and thanks for watching.